In this tutorial, we'll be looking at classes, okay? So everything in Kotlin is usually associated with class and objects. So what are classes and what are objects? That's the question that people usually ask. The way I look at classes is like you have to think of classes like a blueprint and objects as in when you actually create the object from that blueprint. So for example, as a child in the UK, when I first came to the UK, I realized that all the houses look the same in London. I lived in London. All the houses look the same. Now, all the houses look the same, all the streets almost look the same because the houses were created from the same design. Okay, so that design is what you can refer to as a class or a blueprint. Okay, so think of classes are like in real life, let's say, for example, a class is like the blueprint of what you're going to create. So let's say, for example, a car is an object. A car has properties such as brand, weight, color, and functions. Some of the functions of a car are like it drives, you can brake. So think of a class as we're just creating the blueprint of what the object is going to be like. Okay. So in this particular example, I'm going to use typically I'm going to use, let's say, a car, because maybe a car may be something that may be easier for people to understand. So how we create classes in Android Studio is you click on the package on this side. So I right click here, or we can even create a class. I'm sure we can create a class in this here. So for the purpose of this thing, we're going to create a class here. So let's say class car, for example, right? Now, a car has a brand, has a model, and has a year. So what I would do is I would do var brand equals, I'll leave it as blank. We can set a default value for it, but I'll leave it as blank. Var model, I'll also use that as I'll also leave that as blank as well. Var year equals, I'll also leave that, maybe the year will be a 0, okay, because we're dealing with integers, okay? So these brand, model, and year that we've specified, right, are basically properties. Essentially, they are variables which belongs to the class. So they are variables that actually belong to that class, okay? So what I've done is I've created a class called car. And I'm saying that every time I create an object from my car has to have a brand, has to have a model, and has to have a year. Okay. So now I've created my class. How do I now create the object? It's very simple in Kotlin to create an object. Okay. How do we do this? We do this with var. You can do a var or var. Ideally, creating an object is not going to change. So we use val. Val, let's say car1 equals, and then you call car. Simple. We've just created an object from our car class. Okay. Now, remember that our car object class has some properties. So this is car1. So car1, what is the name of car1? I'll do car1 dot. I always like to call this the power of the dot. Whenever you're not sure about a class, click the dot. It will give you all the properties and all the functions inside that class, okay? So I know that my car class requires a brand. So brand equals, okay, let's just say an Audi car one dot, let's say a model, let's say A4 or A5 or A6, for example. And then we can do the year, car one dot year equals, I'm not gonna put a number just in case you're trying to guess what car I drive. So let's say 2025. Okay, 2025. Okay. What I've basically done right now is I've created an object from my car class and I have accessed the properties and added some values to it. Okay. So in this case, if I wanted to print out the name, the brand of the car, again, system.out.println car1.brand. And if I run my application again, okay, it said I have to reinstall and restart, which is fine. Sometimes you may get that error. If and then, I mean, I can easily just go to Logcats, but I usually like to click on it. What we'll see bottom here is, can you see Aldi? Now, instead of me, if I wanted to print out all the details about my car, I would have to do system.out.println car1.brand and then, print out the model, print out the year. I can actually create a function inside that car class, which when it's called, it will display all the information about that car. Okay, now how do I do this? Very simple. We go to our car class, then we'll create a function. Okay, so fun display details. Typical function, just like we learned function in the previous one. And then all we can do here is we can just do system dot out dot println, and then we can just pass in, let's say, there are two ways we can do this. I'm going to use the $ brand. Okay, Kotlin allows us to use this $ to put variables inside quotation marks. Brand dot model, so colon, and then here. Okay, so what I've done is I have basically just created a function, a display details function, which can be used for any object that I create. Okay, so if I go back to my object that I created for car one, I wouldn't need this anymore. I can just do car one dot, and then you see display details there. I will select display details, and then I would run my application again. Once I run my application, you see Audi A6 2025. Okay, so that is how we create a class and create objects out of it. And you can create multiple objects. So for example, I can create var car2 equals car2 dot brand equals Toyota dot model dot Toyota Kofi car2 dot year equals, well, 2028. Okay, and then I can do car2 dot display details, and then if I refresh and run again, what I would get is, hey, Audi A6 2025, Toyota Kofi 2028. So that is how we deal with classes. Okay, now One thing I wanted to talk to you about is constructors. Okay. So when previously in our as we've just created our car, we created an object. When we were creating our object, we had to define some properties inside our class in order for us to obviously assign the brand, the model, and the year. But there is an easier way of doing this using constructors. Okay, so a constructor in a simplest term is like a special function which is defined using two parentheses. So for example, in our previous examples, we created a function, which in that function, we did not have to create variables inside. All we had to do was just pass in some um, well, some variables inside the parentheses, and it was easier. If you remember the add function we created where it takes in two things, we can actually do the same thing for constructor. A constructor is how we construct the object. So instead of me having to have car1.brand equals Audi, car1.model equals Audi, we can actually create a constructor in, well, we can either create a constructor, a simple constructor, which will allow us to be able to use create our objects, okay? How would we do this? So instead of having var brand, var model, var year, what I can do is I'll just add these two here, these two parentheses, right? And then similar to functions, I'm just going to do var brand string, right? var model string, var year string. And then, no, actually our year is going to be an integer. And then I can comment these out, okay? Once I comment these out, what it basically means is that when I am constructing my car, I do not need to actually access the properties anymore. I can just pass in directly. So I'm getting an error here because I am trying to create an object in the wrong way because I've changed the way it's supposed to be. So if I comment this out now, I can create my car object this way. Var car 1 equals car, right? And then I can just pass in. It tells you exactly the kind of variables it's expecting. So brand, Audi, okay? Just wait, Audi. Model is A6. And then the year is 2028. Okay. Now, in this case, all I've basically done is I have changed the way I am constructing and I can just easily just do car 1 dot display details, and this will also work because we've just made things a whole lot easier by passing in parameters. And there we have it, Audi A6 2028. So that's how you deal with parameters. Okay. Now we can create several functions in there. I've just showed you how to create functions. So that's how Kotlin is used in Android Studio. Okay. So in the next tutorials, we'll actually be using all of these, what we've just learned in actual applications that we'll be teaching. Thank you.